we move into the meditation portion of our service, that sacred moment where we connect with the divine within us and all around us. So I invite you to take a long, deep breath. Hold it for a moment and then release it completely. And then pause. Before again taking a second long, deep breath that fills you up. Hold it. Release it. And rest. And one more long inhalation, drawing in the life energy of air and oxygen, holding it for a moment while it circulates throughout your physical being. And then let go. Release any cares or concerns. Release anything that doesn't serve your very highest good. And relax. Sink a little more deeply into your chair. And allow that chair to remind you just how solidly, lovingly, and reliably you are supported in this world. Spirit within us, Spirit all around us, reminds us that we are truly free. Created in the likeness and image of the ineffable Creator, we are free to create the life we desire, to collectively create the world that we want. Freedom is our birthright. For this we are grateful. And as we entertain the concept of freedom, we think about how that applies to each of us individually in our own lives. What are we free to do? What are we free to be? Who are we free to become? We are all free at any moment of any day to enter into that sacred, inspiring, uplifting presence of Mother, Father, God. And now we freely choose to do just that in our time of prayer and meditation as we bask in the presence of the allness of God in the silence. aligning my mind and my thoughts with that universal intelligence, I am guided to wise choices as I express my freedom. I take responsibility for my choices, and I am empowered as I become more and more that Christ presence that I was created to be. With hearts overflowing with gratitude for the gift of freedom, we say thank you, God. And so it is.
Love Will Guide Us by Sally Rogers. Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us, really the way, on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night. If you cannot be like angels, if you cannot speak before thousands, you can give from deep within you. You can change the world with your love. You are like no other being. What you can give, no other can give. To the future of our precious children, to the future of the world where we live. Hear the song of peace within you. Hear the song of peace in your heart. Spring's new beginning will lead to the harvest. Love will guide us on our way. Love will guide us, peace has tried us, hope inside us will lead the way, on the road from greed to giving. Love will guide us through the hard night. Love will guide us through the hard night.
Morning. Good morning. Happy 4th of July. You know, last week I was eavesdropping on the Rainbow Circles class. And the teacher was talking with the little ones about being free. one little boy was standing there with his arms across his chest, looking quite unhappy. And she stopped and said, "What's wrong? What's going on with you?" He said, "I'm not free, I'm 4." Yeah, don't try and put anything over on a little kid. You'll never get away with it. But we're talking about freedom, and the good news is we enjoy so much freedom in this country and in our lives. The bad news is freedom ain't free. We're going to talk about that this morning from a practical and a spiritual perspective. We have at Unity what we call the 5 principles, 5 basic core understandings that everything we talk about really bubbles down to. All 5 of those principles, if you think about it, speak to freedom. The first principle is this: God is absolute good, everywhere present. How does that free us? Well, it frees us from some kind of a God or deity that punishes, and it frees us to trust in a benevolent, loving universe that is always good, and there for us. In the second unity principle, we remember that we all have a spark of divinity within us, what we call the Christ Spirit, that our very essence is of the Creator, and consequently, we are inherently good. How does that free us? It frees us to express the truth of who we are, which, like the Creator, is goodness. And it frees us to trust ourselves. In the third unity principle, we say we create our experiences by the activity of our thinking. How does that free us? Well, it frees us and empowers us to co-create the life we dream about. It frees us from feelings of victimization, from blame, from powerlessness. And it frees us to accept responsibility for our lives when we realize we have the power to change what may have been holding us back. Hear that again. It frees us to accept responsibility for our lives when we realize we have the power to change what might be holding us back. There's the rub. We're responsible for the choices we make with our freedom. Or as Freud observed, most people don't really want freedom because freedom involves responsibilities. Responsibility is the price of freedom. Freedom leads to consequences. If we think back to the book of Genesis, where first man and first woman were cautioned, if you eat of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you will surely die. This isn't Jehovah threatening punishment on Adam and Eve. This is the Creator simply stating a fact. Choices have consequences. And consequences are a two-edged sword. You know, we're so eager to take credit when things go well. Not so eager to take credit when life blows up in our face. You don't believe me? Pay attention to any sporting event, from the kids' t-ball to professional sports. When your team wins, what's the cry? We're number one. We did it. We won. What happens when the team loses? Oh, the coach did a poor job. He put in the wrong person at the wrong time. The referees muffed their call. Management isn't doing a good job. It's their fault. We win, but if it doesn't work out well, it's their fault. Let's put it in grown-up terms. Say we are making some investments. And we choose a stock and we invest in it. And the company does extraordinarily well, and the value of the stock goes up exponentially. Our investment is multiplied many times over. And we tell our friends, you know, I just had a feeling about that company. I knew it was going to do well. Or we might say, you know, my broker, I always listen because my broker always has good information for me. But what if we invest in a stock that the company falters and the stock tanks? What do we say then? Oh, well, the company wasn't accurate in their prospectus. Or my broker misled me. Have you ever heard anyone say, well, I should have researched it more, I made a poor choice? I'm still waiting to hear that. Not too many people will say it. We are free, extraordinarily free here in the US of A, free to choose, free spiritually. But we're loath to take responsibility when we don't like the consequences of our choice. Many years ago, I was director, HR director for a mid-sized manufacturing company. And I hired at one point a young lady to work as a receptionist. Those things always do. It started out well, but it didn't last well very long. She was late and later. When she showed up at all, she was forever calling in sick. When she was given projects to handle, she either didn't handle them on time or did a poor job of them. And I met with her several times, highlighting the concerns that I had, that the other people in the company had that were relying on her, and discussed improvements that we told her were very necessary. Those improvements were not forthcoming. And ultimately, I had the very unpleasant task of having to terminate this young woman. I still recall, it was a tragic scene. Tears, anger, begging, I need this job, you can't fire me. And ultimately, she went stomping out of the building with her belongings in a box under her arm in a fury. I have no doubt at all that she went home and told her friends what an unreasonably demanding witch I was, and how this company asked way too much of her. Personally, I was relieved to put the matter behind me and move on, and wound up hiring another young lady who proved to be a great asset to the company for a number of years. It was 9, 10, 11 months, close to a year later. I was sitting in my office, and this young lady, who I will call the reluctant receptionist, appeared in the doorway. She was smiling, she had a bounce in her step, and she politely asked for a few minutes of my time. So we sat down and began visiting. And she shared with me how angry and upset she'd been when she was terminated. And it took her a while to work through that. And she said one day she was sitting at home, mulling about her job search, looking at her resume, trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do next? And in that process, her eyes fell on the letter of dismissal I'd given her, which enumerated the reasons for her termination. In some way, somehow, she began looking at that letter with a little different perspective. She realized that each point on the list were aspects of her behavior that she could control. But she'd made choices, probably unconscious choices, coming in late, calling in sick, not doing her work. It occurred to her that all of those issues were about her behavior. And that's what led ultimately to her termination. In other words, in the parlance that we're looking at today, she exercised her freedom of choice, She experienced the consequences of those choices, and she did not like those consequences. She went on to tell me that being fired was a wake-up call for her. When she figured out that it was her behaviors that she was responsible for that led to her termination, she then figured out she could make different choices in the future and be successful. And she went on to say that being responsible for her choices was incredibly empowering. With that insight, she found a new job that was actually much better suited to her skills and talents, and she was loving it, and they loved her. As she took responsibility for her choices, she looked like a superstar to her new employer. And then, to my amazement, she concluded what she had to say by saying, "Thank you, Laurie, for firing me." HR directors don't often get thanks, much less things like that. I was absolutely blown away. This young lady had matured exponentially in just a very, very short time. Her story highlights for you and me the importance of accepting responsibility that comes with our freedom. You see, when she began to accept responsibility, she stopped blaming other people. She stopped being a victim, and she became empowered. She and I stayed in touch, kind of casually on and off over the years. It was fun to hear how she went on and built not only a successful career, but had a wonderful relationship and eventually a family. And it was all based on making choices for which she took responsibility. I even got a phone call one day. She was applying for a new job with another company that would have been a major advancement. And when I realized who was on the phone looking for a referral for her, I thought, oh my gosh, am I going to tell these people we canned her? And they said, what can you tell us about this young woman? And I said, she is an amazing young lady who will without doubt be an asset to your organization. And that was true. How many of you have read 7 Habits of Highly Successful People? A lot of us, okay. Then you might find this familiar. Stephen Covey tells us, look at the word responsibility. Responsibility, the ability to choose your response. He goes on to say that highly proactive people recognize that responsibility. They don't blame circumstances or conditions or conditioning for their behavior. Their behavior is a product of their own choice. Created in the likeness and image of the Creator, we are innately free. It's our birthright. It's who we are. It's there at the core of our being. We can do as we choose anytime we want. But that freedom isn't free. It must be tempered with responsibility. New Thought and self-help guru Marianne Williamson brings it back around to the third unity principle for us and drives it home. She says, you may believe you're responsible for what you do, but not for what you think. The truth is, you are responsible for what you think, because it's only at this level that you can exercise choice. What you do comes from what you think. That's our third unity principle, back to where we started this morning. We create our experiences by the activity of our thinking. We are free and empowered to create the life we dream of as we take responsibility for our thoughts as we weed out those thoughts that don't serve us and actively, consciously embrace and entertain higher thinking. This idea frees us from feelings of victimization by life. It frees us from blame and powerlessness, anything that keeps us from our higher good, our greater good. And finally, once again, it frees us to accept responsibility for our lives when we realize we have the power to change that which is holding us back. If you don't like how your life is playing out, take a look at your thoughts and your actions and take responsibility for them. Change your thoughts, make different choices, handle yourself differently. Listening to some 4th of July celebrations this weekend, the Star-Spangled Banner, the words really struck me. The land of the free and the home of the brave. It takes bravery. It takes courage to be responsible for your thoughts and actions and choices. But such responsibility goes hand in hand with the exercise of freedom. And when we take responsibility, only then are we uniquely empowered to create the life we desire. So let's celebrate our freedom and our responsibility by again visiting our affirmation for today. Together,
I am grateful for the gift of freedom. Drawing on divine wisdom, I boldly take responsibility for my use of freedom's gifts.
And so it is.